What's going on, people? Welcome back to another episode of the Get It Bucket podcast with me, your host, Chris LeBron, as always, joined by my guy, Kev. Kev, what's going on, bro?
Man, I'm glad to be back. It feels so good out right now. It's that time of the year, as we already know. The season is right around the corner. We're previewing the SEC today, so I'm ready to get into it, man. But life is good as always. How you doing?
I'm doing good, brother, man. I'm excited about this third episode. We are, like I said, we are talking about the SEC basketball conference. It is a conference that had a lot of teams go dancing last year, had a team in the Final Four. So we're gonna go through everything in the SEC. We'll talk about some of the newcomers in the SEC, Texas, Oklahoma. We'll talk about some new coaches, new faces, and we'll talk about some of the recruits, transfers, and all that. And then we'll have Kev tier the SEC. But Kev, let's go through some of the. We'll go through the standings last year in the SEC. We had Tennessee, Auburn, Bama, Kentucky, South Carolina, Florida, Texas A&M, all tourney teams, by the way. LSU, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Georgia, Arkansas, Vandy, and then Mizzou, who did not win a game in the SEC. And then we have two new teams in the SEC. The Texas Longhorns are joining the SEC, and the Oklahoma Sooners are in the SEC. And then we got a couple new faces in the SEC. Coach John Calipari, no longer in Kentucky. He is now in Arkansas. And then we also have Mark Pope taking over for Coach Cal, coming over from BYU. So a lot of new things going on in the SEC. Bama represented in the Final Four. They lost to UConn, who just absolutely they destroyed everybody. So can't even get mad at that. But what are some of the things you're intrigued about? What are some storylines you're intrigued about with what's going on in the SEC this season?
I think the main ones are the ones you already mentioned, right? You got to look at Cal at Arkansas, right? He was there at Kentucky for a long time. He admitted that he overstayed his time at Kentucky. He thought he should have took the UCLA job a few years ago, which would have been crazy. He came out and said that was a possibility. And, of course, now he's at Arkansas, so I know we'll talk about that in a minute. Of course, you got to look at Mark Pope at Kentucky. Going from BYU to Kentucky is a major leap, even though he's an alum there, won a championship there under Rick Pitino in '96. So it kind of all worked out. I know most Kentucky fans weren't really expecting that. You know, they were looking at Scott Drew. They were looking at a couple other places they thought they could get Danny Hurley. That didn't work out. We all thought, Danny Hurley was either going to go there or the Lakers. That didn't work out, and they ended up with Mark Pope. So I think that's, those two things are probably the biggest storylines. And after that, I mean, you got to talk about the newcomers, right? Texas, Oklahoma, those are two major brands, not just in college basketball, but in college sports as a whole, right? And I think both those programs currently right now are in interesting states. And, we'll talk about them too in a second, but I probably say that's the biggest thing, man. You have a giant in Coach Cal, and I got to give Coach Cal his flowers because Coach Cal has literally raised the level of competition in the SEC all these years.
Thank you for saying that, because there was a point where the SEC was like, oh, it's the complete opposite of the football side, because it was like, oh no, it's bad. It's Kentucky, and then that's it.
Yeah, and I don't think people realize that. Like, the SEC was not heavily interested in basketball whatsoever, right? They were strictly football, and Cal literally had all these other schools looking like, hey, we can get involved in basketball. The South is one of the best places in the world in regards to producing talent, right? And so you have, you get Bruce Pearl at Auburn, you get Nate Oates at Alabama, you get Eric Musselman at Arkansas. Obviously, he's gone now, but you get other dudes going to different places, and it's like, okay, like obviously, of course, you have Billy Donovan at Florida, and Florida's always kind of been there in the mix, but now it's just like they're taking basketball more seriously, and you're even seeing the bottom tier schools starting to rise up and starting to make a name for themselves. And you have
South
to give
Carolina, Georgia,
and all that credit has to go to Coach Cal. Like I always say, you got to give, Coach K and Coach Roy Williams, the credit for lifting up the ACC. You got to give Coach Izzo the credit for lifting up the Big Ten. You got to give Bill Self credit for lifting up the Big 12. And it's a couple others out there. But in regards to the SEC, like John Calipari is a larger than life figure for this conference as a whole. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for that.
100%. He elevated a conference that was just like it was like, all right, they're definitely, out of the powers, 6 schools, Power 5 schools, the conferences, they're definitely last, and I think that's why people sometimes were, you know, skeptical sometimes with Kentucky. It's like, all right, well, they're not playing anyone. They're going 18-0, 17-1,
Mhm.
16-2 in the conference. But it's like, all right, they didn't play no one. You might have a year where, you know, uh, Bama was good or Auburn was good, but for the most part, it was Kentucky just rolling. But you have to give him his props. Just elevate, and he just elevated the sport itself. I mean,
Facts.
I mean, yes, we can talk about, oh well, he only won the one national championship, but okay, we know
It's
one and
deeper than that.
done. It's
Mhm.
it's hard. It is hard, and when you're dealing with young kids, I think that's the most underrated aspect of, like, we just look at the star ratings and this All American, but like there's still young kids, that are still trying to figure out stuff, and hey, you slip up, you play a team that has a bunch of 22-year-olds,
Yep.
it's gonna happen, and that felt like it happened a lot towards Coach Cal's tenure and just the roster construction, just trying to figure it out, especially when you're in a one and done, especially not just in one and done era, but the COVID era where you got,
Yep.
and that's going to go away. And I know a lot of coaches are really happy that the COVID stuff's going to be in. Now we can play a more even playing field. You're not going to have 20 through 23, 24, 25-year-olds, 26-year-olds. I think there's a 27-year-old. Didn't Memphis have like a 27-year-old playing? Like,
Yeah,
go, bro,
DeAndre
go get a
Wayne.
job, bro. Go ND, go get a job. It's
Oh
time to wrap
man.
it up. So that's going to come to. Yeah, Coach Cal's stint at Kentucky was legendary. What he was able to do with elevate the program back to where it once was, and just put college basketball on the map. Like, it was a must watch TV to see Kentucky play. I mean, the celebrity row from, like, Drake, they did that, so much going on, and it was definitely, he had a tremendous time, tremendous run at Kentucky. So, but now he's in Arkansas, and it's still taking a little bit of adjustment to, but um, let's get right into the coaches. Like I said, Coach Cal, Arkansas, Mark Pope taking over um, for Coach Cal. Let's go with Mark Pope first. And obviously, Kentucky is a blue blood program. It is, expectations are through the roof, and I still think there are going to be very high expectations at Kentucky, despite Coach Cal not being there. And Mark Pope, did a solid job at BYU. They went to the tournament, was there for 6 years, made it to the tournament 3 times. So, and he's an alum, won a national championship with Coach Cal. So that's going to even make expectations, just as high, because he is,
Mhm.
part of Big Blue Nation. So, how do we feel about, well, Mark Pope and are expectations reasonable, or do you think they're still going to be very high for him at Kentucky?
I think they're reasonable just because, again, he knows and understands what the expectations are. He played there. He's been connected to the program for a long time. I'm sure he's been a fan from afar, coaching at different places. And so to me, he started off coaching at Utah Valley in 2015-16, and he was there for 4 years. Then he worked his way over to BYU, and he won some games at BYU, got them to the NCAA tournament twice. So I think he knows what it takes. And when you look at this squad that he has, I thought he did a good job of putting a roster together. And I always say, as a first year head coach, for the most part, you get hired in the spring, and your job really from there is to just throw together a roster as soon as possible. It doesn't matter how good or bad it is. You literally just have to get players, right? At that point, because you already know, for the most part, most dudes that are in the transfer portal know exactly where they're headed the moment
Exactly.
before they get
Most
in
likely,
there.
yep. Mhm.
So to me, I thought he did a really good job of doing that. So to me, I think as a whole, I expect Mark Pope to have a lot of success there. You're already seeing he's getting recruits. He got Jasper Johnson. He got Malachi Moreno. Sound like he's going to get a couple others too in the fold. So I'm looking forward to see how that plays out. And I don't even think he necessarily has to recruit to the standard that Cal did, because Cal is
Yeah.
literally a once in a generational type recruiter. He is the greatest recruiter of all time, in my opinion. So I'm looking forward to Mark Pope. I think it's all going to work out. His system to me is the most fascinating thing, because if you go back and watch BYU last year, they made it to the tournament strictly because of their offense. Their offense was one of the most dynamic offenses in the game. They ran 5 out. They did a lot of cutting, a lot of off the ball action. And you would hear other opposing Big 12 coaches always talk about that's one of the hardest offenses we had to see all season long. And they got into the tournament and they fell short. They lost to Duquesne last year. So, you got to worry about that. But for Kentucky, the standard's the standard. And you have to, I want to say this too real quick. For Kentucky fans, please do not be bitter at Coach Cal. Let it go.
Yeah, that's
Like,
weird. That's weird.
let it go. Cal did his job. And I understand. Trust me, I understand. The few NCAA tournament runs these past years, losing to St. Peter's, losing to K-State, losing to Oakland this year, it stings, it hurts. I know you guys expect more than that, and I agree. You guys deserve more than that. But at the same time, what Cal did to Kentucky, he raised it to a completely different level. Like, Kentucky is Kentucky, but Cal took it and went supreme sky high with it. You know what I'm saying? But for Pope, I think he'll be fine. Again, I like this first year team. I thought he added a whole bunch of really good pieces, bringing over Jackson Robinson, who was his best player last year at BYU. Yeah. Lamont Butler, shout out to him. He's a dog from out here. Of course, hit that shot in the Final Four to San Diego State to the championship game a few years ago. You got a whole bunch of pieces. Kobe Brea is a big-time shooter out of Dayton. So to me, Mark Pope should be fine. I think this was a really good hire for Kentucky, and I think their fans are slowly but surely starting to see that.
I think, essentially he has like his whole starting lineup, or most of his main guys that are going to do the rotational guys are portal guys, and it's just going to look different because it's not going to be all just freshmen. And we know that experience in today's era of college basketball is what wins, right? The one and done era. It could come back, like I said, once the COVID stuff's up, maybe we'll get back to freshmen being able to lead teams to deep runs in tournaments. But we know that experience is what wins. We saw, obviously, UConn just went back to back. They had a lot of experience. Now they had high caliber players, but those guys were 2, 3, 4, 5 years in to the program. And I think Mark Pope's going to do it this way. He's going to, he's probably, maybe not for the first few years, get those, the top 10 recruits. He's going to have to maybe go outside, get those lower 4-star, 3-star guys, and then go hit the portal. But if you're a Kentucky fan, this might be the move to go. Like to go this route and develop players, to get experienced players, and just see if this is the move. Because obviously with Coach Cal, you're always going to try to. Every coach wants to get that top player in the country. Every coach wish they had a shot to get Cooper Flagg or the booze, like, and you want those to try to get but it's not realistic all the time, especially Mark Pope. You're coming in and you're trying to get your feet in. So I think this could be the way that Kentucky fans got to get used to, but it could benefit them because this could be. And when they're getting good players, they said Lamont Butler is a good player. Like I said, Jackson Robinson was a good player for Mark Pope at BYU. So they're getting some quality players. So that transition might not be as tough as it may have been, maybe if it was a different coach that wasn't in that, Big Blue Nation, alumni, so I think they'll be all right. I think this is I could be wrong. This is their lowest preseason ranking.
Yep.
Since Coach Cal took over, I something like that. I could be wrong on the exact verb, but it was something to that ill where it was, it's just different times. So, we'll see. But I think he'll have more success than people may think, at Kentucky. I think he'll be all right. But Coach Cal is at Arkansas. He decided to, it was just time. Like you said, maybe he thought maybe he stood a little too long, and but decided to go to Arkansas, and he brought a lot of people with him. And transfer portal guys, got a lot of guys from Kentucky going, recruits that were committed to Kentucky. Carter Knox, Boogie Flan, guys who committed to Kentucky following his steps into Arkansas. And then the transfer portal, John L. Davis, is coming there. Brings back Trayvon Brazile, so there's a homie from Tennessee. What's his name? Adu.
You only say
He
do. Yeah.
you want to say Adu? He's going there. So there's a lot of people on this roster. I'm skeptical about this, Kev, because it sounds good, right? It sounds good. Like if this is 2K, like oh yeah, we got a squad. I don't know how much this. I know bringing in. I think I like that he brought in John Davis. I think he's going to be an All-American caliber player. You're hoping that Trayvon looks like the Trayvon we talked about in that Maui run a few years ago. Like we hope that because that was like top 15 type of player. He looked special. He was shooting threes, bouncy. Like before he tore his ACL, like he like a special player. But there's a lot of new faces, a lot of people who need the ball in their hand. You know, I don't know. I'm skeptical about it working year one. Maybe it works in the next few years, but I don't know. Kev, talk to me about that. How do you like the roster construction right now? Because I'm not entirely feeling it right now.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a consensus thing right now. I think a lot of people are kind of questioning how he's constructed his roster, but I'm not gonna lie, I think he did it right. And even if he didn't necessarily do it right, my thing is when it comes to balancing out elite guard play, nobody in the country does it better than Coach Cal, in my opinion.
100%.
Right? We've seen De'Aaron Fox and Malik Monk. We've seen Shea Gilgeous-Alexander and other guys. Right? We've seen a whole bunch of guys. Tyrese Maxey, Emmanuel quickly. So I think he knows how to balance that out. Jamal Murray and Tyler Ulis and Isaiah Briscoe. So to me, when I look at this Arkansas team, as you mentioned, they brought in pretty much a few different dudes from Kentucky, DJ Wagner, Big Z, Zvonimir Ivicic, Adu Thiero, amongst others. I think the freshman class is really good too, right? You got Boogie Flan, you got Carter Knox, you got Billy Richmond. So to me, I mean, the talent is evident. Honestly, I think it's all about just putting it together. And they're not as deep as they were last year at his final year at Kentucky, but the pieces are there. And again, you mentioned Trayvon Brazile. He could be one of the biggest X factors, not just in the SEC, but in the entire country. And I think he's going to look closer to the dude that we thought he was going to be 2 years ago before he tore his ACL compared to last year, where we seen with Muss, it was kind of just a cluster. They just threw some things together, and it was so much talent on the roster, but they could not put it together whatsoever. So I am sold on this Arkansas roster. Again, I think when you look at John L. Davis, as you mentioned, one of the premier guards in the country for the past few years. Now, again, Boogie Flan, DJ Wagner is going to have that chip on his shoulder. So, I mean, you cannot overlook the talent. And again, we said all the time, talent alone does not win you games, but it does help out a lot. It's all about mixing and matching and making sure that chemistry meshes together. So I love this Arkansas roster. I think they have one of the best front courts in the country. Again, when you have Big Z, Jonas Adu, and Trayvon Brazile, like, come on now. That three-headed monster right there is crazy. You can run a small ball on it with Trayvon at the 5, and you're good. You know what I'm saying? So Arkansas, I expect them to easily be top 5 in this conference. No doubt about it in my mind.
So do you think that Cal can get everyone to buy in? Because that's going to be the biggest thing, is because you got a bunch of 5-star. Carter Knox a 5-star, Boogie's a 5-star, but remember DJ was a 5-star. Big Z's coming in. But you got to make sure that John L's coming. He's coming in. He's an experienced player. He's going to have the ball in his hand a lot. So that's the thing. Is do you think that everyone can buy into their role and understand their role and make it work?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a weird balancing act at first, but when you look at it, I mean, DJ Wagner is pretty much going to be asked to do exactly what he did last year with Reed Shepherd and Rob Dillingham, right? Just play off the ball, take the right shots at the right time, get into the paint, get into the lane, make plays for yourself or for others. John L. Davis is just going to be John L. Davis. I mean, they paid him a lot in NIL to get over there, rightfully so. Again, he's been one of the top guards in the country for the past 2 seasons. He's going to be doing the same thing, right? Make plays, go get your own buckets, and figure it out for everybody else. And then the easiest transition should really be for Boogie Flan. Just be a point guard. You're not going to be asked to do anything else except be a point guard. Just set the table, and when shots come your way, take them. Make the defense pay. So outside of that, I mean, Adu Thiero has always been a really good role player that knows exactly what's expected out of him. Everybody else has got to fall in line. Zvonimir Ivicic is another guy just because we've seen the talent. He was very raw, coming from overseas last year, but I think with a summer under his belt, getting acclimated to the college basketball game, he's going to be way more better, way more experienced. And so again, when you look at that front court, they just have it. And I think all around they have it. The wings is probably the only thing that concerns me just because you don't have too much shooting between a dude the arrow. And I think Carter Knox is going to give you that and maybe some from Billy Richmond. But outside of that, I thought Cal did a great job of just putting a roster together and making a roster that can compete in year one.
Yeah, and that is the impressive part is getting all these guys in so quick. Like be able to flip guys to be like, yo, come to Arkansas. Now, it's crazy enough to think you got to go to Kentucky, especially like if you're Boogie Flang, you coming from New York, coming from the Bronx, and then you got to go Kentucky. Then it's like, no, we got to switch it up. We got to go to Arkansas now. You know, it's different. You know, so you got to give Cal. Cal just has the magic touch with that. So for him to pull off this roster in a short time is impressive, especially to get guys to be like, yo, come to Arkansas. But we'll see. You know, hopefully he can. It felt like the last few years he's been, you know, trying to figure out the roster construction, the right lineups. It hasn't worked, but maybe do situation, maybe not as much pressure, you know, because yeah, he's Coach Cal, but you know, Arkansas they may be a little bit more patient than Kentucky fans are, you know. So maybe that, but he pulled off some good. Like I said, I like the addition of John L. Davis. Obviously, that's tremendous. That's one of the best players in the country. He should be in contention to be an All-American, you know. And I think his veteran leadership should be able to really bring a presence to that young backcourt that they have, you know, because they got obviously tremendous talent. So we'll see what happens. But Arkansas is definitely going to be a place, a team that's going to be on the watch. But Kev, let's talk about some of the top recruits going in, and then we'll talk more about some of the other teams in the SEC. But we mentioned before that the SEC used to be a place where you didn't get the top talent. It was Kentucky and that was it. It's definitely expanded where we got a lot more balance in the conference. But Trey Johnson, the number 5 recruit in the country, he's going to Texas. Hassan Noel going to Georgia. Georgia feels like they pull off that one, like, you know, like a few years ago with Ant-Man. Like it feels like they're and I always said I feel like Georgia should be like, whenever we talk about like, all right, what football schools, like what football school should have a basketball school that should be close to like being like, you know, a top program too. And I said Georgia should be way better at basketball. It's Georgia, you know, like
Yep.
there's hoopers in Georgia,
A
you
lot of
know,
them.
there's a lot of hoopers in Georgia. So like I always felt like Georgia is a job that's like a sleeping giant. And they definitely improved a lot last year. Dan Reed, Alabama had, I think, the number 2 recruiting class in the country. They had a haul. They picked up a bunch of guys. Aiden Sherrill, you know, LeBaron fell on. I mean, Walker had talked about him, you know, that he was looking good in practice. Like I said, Billy Richmond and Carter Knox going to Arkansas, Boogie Fland also. So a lot of, you know, Mizzou pulled off a Wu-Tang. You know, I saw a little bit of him. You know, some people talked about him, so I heard some good things from him. But Cam Scott, South Carolina, also. So what those out of those freshmen, who are you? And we talked about the Arkansas guys, but who are you looking most forward to see him play this year?
Man, I think the one that's going to make the most noise is actually head to Auburn, and he's up from your way in the tri-state area, is Tahad Pettiford. I
Yeah,
mean,
Jersey kid.
yeah, Jersey kid. Went to Hudson Catholic. For those of y'all that know, that's the same school that produced Javon Quinley that was at Memphis, and Lewis King, who was in the NBA, went to Oregon for a little bit of time too. So, I mean, Tahad Pettiford is a lefty, point guard, super athletic, got an elite mid-range game, just a hell of a big-time floor general, long wingspan, gets in the passing lanes, makes plays defensively. I think for Bruce Pearl's system, I mean, he's perfect. Bruce Pearl thrives with them smaller guards, where there's Jared Harper, Sharif Cooper. Tried to work it out with Aiden Holloway last year. Of course, that didn't work itself out. But when it comes to smaller guards, Bruce Pearl knows exactly what he's doing. I think for Tahad Pettiford, that is a match made in heaven. And you mentioned Georgia. I'll just go back to that real quickly. Like when it comes to Georgia and the SEC, I mean, just the last few years, you had Sharif Cooper, you had Jabari Smith, you had JD Note at Arkansas. Like Georgia's done a great job at really running the SEC for the most part. And so, shout out to Asa Noel. Going back to Bama, you mentioned LeBaron Philon. I think Aiden Sherrill is another guy that is going to be a monster for them. Originally from Detroit, I would have loved to have him on my Spartans, but he ends up playing for Nate Oates in the Crimson Tide. 7-footer, active rim runner, block shots, pick and roll game is elite. Just knows how to get into the paint and make and wreak havoc. So I think give him a couple years, he'll start to figure it out. You mentioned LeBaron. Alabama is a guard factory right now, and I think LeBaron Philon is going to sneak into that lineup and rotation and earn minutes and be a heavily relied upon favorite for Nate Oates in the Crimson Tide this year. And of course, you bring back Mark Sears. You added Aiden Holloway from your rival school. But LeBaron, another guy, he went to Link Prep out there in Missouri last year. He just knows how to win. He just contributes to winning at a high level. And I think that's a big time get for the Crimson Tide. He's from the state of Alabama, so that's going to work itself out just fine. And then I'll finish off with this one, Jeremiah Fears. I mean, younger brother Jeremy Fears, my point guard at Michigan State, reclass, was originally in the class of 2025. He's now a freshman. He's at Oklahoma. It's a big time year for Porter Moser and the Sooners. And you needed him because that roster, I'm not going to lie, they lost a lot of talent. They lost J.V. McCullum. They lost John Hughley. They lost a lot of guys. They lost, players. So to me, getting a point guard that can step in and immediately contribute, even though he's a little bit behind the 8 ball just because he reclassed so late into the summer, Jeremiah Fears is that guy. And he's definitely an NBA player in my opinion. Once he gets to the weight room, fills his body out, starts to get older and more mature, he's going to thrive for a long time in my opinion. So I definitely say look out for him because as a freshman, he's going to have one of the biggest impacts in the country just based off opportunity.
100%, 100%. And simply because I'm from New York, got a Boogie flying into me, rooting for him. Harlem's finest. Looking, gonna. I think he's really good. I think he should have been ranked higher. I think he's that special. I'm really looking forward to see what he does out there in Arkansas. So, but we talked about a lot of these transfers because there was a lot of big time transfers. Are there any transfers in the SEC, guys, that you feel like are going to make the biggest impact? Like I said, a lot of guys, a lot of big time transfers that are heading to the SEC. But which ones for you stand out the most that you feel like can make the biggest impact?
Man, I'm gonna start off with an underrated one. I'm gonna go with Kanye Clary at Mississippi State. He was at Penn State last year, and to me, he was just a dude that you could legit put the rock in his hands and say, "Go make us a play," and he could do that. And for him to go to Mississippi State, he didn't finish the year off at Penn State last year for some off the court stuff. I don't know exactly what it was. I don't want to speculate, but I think he's in a new position next to another small guard and Josh Hubbard, who was amazing as a freshman. He's going to walk into that situation with Riley Kugel, who's there too. Don't forget, right? So they got a couple good transfers down there. But to me, I think Kanye Clary, man, is just built to go, right? Just a big time scorer and playing off another elite guard and Josh Hubbard is only going to make his life that much more easier. So I don't know where the Bulldogs are going to stack up in regards to the SEC, but Kanye Clary, I definitely say is a name to watch out for. The obvious one is Big Cliff. You guys know, right? I mean, I've been his biggest fan ever since he walked into college, honestly. And I thought Rutgers was only in games because of him. I mean, his defensive presence is second to none in the country. And if Alabama had him last year, I'm not going to say they would have beat UConn in the Final Four, but that game would have been much more competitive.
They don't lose by 20. They don't lose by 20 in that one.
So to me, Cliff is just going to give them a totally different dynamic that they did not have last year. They're one of the most inconsistent defensive teams in the country. And getting a dude like that is just going to take that pressure off him a ton. And so I expect him to walk in and just make a difference because that's exactly what he's built to do. And so I look at those ones. I mean, it's a couple other guys, but I definitely say those are probably my top two. I mean, I want Aiden Holloway to pan out. I think, when you look at him, another guy that he had it, right? He was really, really good, coming out of high school, but he struggled with confidence as a freshman. He struggled with just being able to knock down shots. And I'll tell you guys another sleeper. This is the one that I think is probably the most slept on in the country. Ruben Chinyelu, transfers over from Washington State to Florida. He was on that Washington State team that made to the NCAA tournament last year under Kyle Smith. 6'10". I believe he's going to be a sophomore this year. So I think Florida honestly hit out the park getting him because he is raw. I believe he's originally from Africa. I could be wrong, but he's super raw. But again, big time athlete, will dunk anything and everything. Going to be one of the best defensive players in the country, in my opinion, because I think Todd Golden does a great job of coaching up defense. And just getting a guy like that is going to do wonders for that defense. They were a pretty good defensive team last year with Tyrese Samuel and a couple other guys. But to me, Ruben Chinyelu is a monster. And I think the fact that Florida was able to get him was one of the most underrated transfer pickups in the entire country. And I think he's going to show that this upcoming season. But it's a few guys out there, though, man. I really, as a whole, I mean, you got to go to Kentucky, right? We already mentioned, Lamont Butler is a dog. Jackson Robinson is a 6'7" pro, in my opinion. Kobe Bray is going to knock down shots. So I think, another one, too, shout out to Walker, Malik Dia from Belmont, 6'9" forward that I honestly think he's just scratching the surface of his game, right? Just active all around, rebounds, defends, can run in transition, will dunk on you, and really just, again, tapping into his game. So I love what this conference has added, and it's going to be a couple other guys out there are going to show out and do some amazing things this year.
Yeah, and they Ole Miss got Padula too. He's a bucket. Dre Davis too. So that's why I kind of like Ole Miss this season. And then we'll get into Ole Miss in a little bit. But yeah, there's definitely a lot. This might be the conference that might have some of the most impact transfers in all of college basketball. Like I said, Cliff. I mean, if somehow he would be able to stay, I don't know how Rutgers couldn't afford. I mean, they got money somehow to get the two top freshmen. They should have ponied up a little bit more to keep Cliff there, because if he was there, I think Rutgers, the sky would really be, the limit for them, because I think they would definitely. I mean, they think they were 25th in the AP poll, and that's something we'll talk about a little bit too, the AP poll. But I think they may be higher because of Cliff, and I think Cliff, he could be the difference between Alabama, being a Sweet 16 type of team and to being maybe the national champions. I think he can make that much of an impact. I think he led the country in blocks per game. So he's a special rim protector, and that's why he was very sought out in the transfer portal, and it's going to Tuscaloosa, and that's a big get for Coach Oates. But let's tear him up, Kev, and then we'll start with your tiers, and then talk a little about when we start from the bottom, talk about some of the teams in the bottom, each team as we go through your tiers. So let's tier them up. All right, let me get the pen and paper going. Tier them up. All right, Kev. Let's tier up the SEC.
So at the bottom, I'm going to have to put Vandy. I know it's kind of easy to do, but I do think Vandy did hire a great coach. I truthfully believe that Mark Byington is going to start to win games. I mean, he beat my Spartans to start the season last year at James Madison. He had Terrence Edwards transfer over to Louisville, who should be a All-American candidate, in my opinion. They got my guy, AJ Hogarth.
That's your boy, yep.
So I'm definitely going to be rooting for them and looking out for them a little bit this year. But, for them, Vandy's just a program where it's tough to win at. We all know that. But I do think Mark Byington is one of the better up-and-coming coaches in the country. And so I expect them to make a little bit of noise here in the near future. And then after that, unfortunately, I'm going to go with South Carolina, man. Because, and it hurts me to say this just because, South Carolina, I'm sorry. It hurts me to say this just because Lamont Paris is a hell of a coach. I think he showed that last year. They had a great run last year. They had all the right transfers. They had Colin Murray Boyles, who's going to be an NBA candidate and NBA player very, very soon, probably after this year. But you lose Michi Johnson. You lose a whole bunch of seniors from this past year's team. I just don't see them being able to replicate the success they had last year. So I think they're going to take a step back, but I do trust and believe in what Lamont Paris is building at South Carolina. So I'm not too concerned about them. I just think the SEC is so good, man. It's just tough. That's just the nature of the beast right there.
You got a couple of tough non-conference games too. So I think they got Indiana and Clemson on their schedule. So
yeah. And then this one hurts me to say too, but I'm going to go with LSU. This one is tough, though, because I do believe in Coach McMahon. He was the coach for Ja Morant at Murray State a few years ago, got the job at LSU, took a few guys with him from Murray State last year. But to me, I mean, I love the duo that is Jalen Reed and Tyrell Ward. I think they're probably two of the most underrated players, not just in the SEC, but in the entire country. I just don't see them being able to compete this year, man. They brought in some good freshman talent, too, that I'm definitely looking forward to. You know, Victorious Miller, I think, is going to be a player within the next few seasons, but it's just tough for them. So I'm going to definitely throw LSU in there. And then I got to go Oklahoma. Again, I mentioned it, talking about Jeremiah Fears. He's going to walk in and play a lot, but this is the thing. Porter Moser's going on, I believe, year 4, and he has not been to the NCAA tournament. I mentioned they lost Javen McCullum, they lost John Hughley, they lost Milos Uzan to Houston, and now you're going to be relying on a reclass point guard, bro. That's a tough thing to do in this environment when the game is older, when the game's more experienced, when it's ran through 23, 24-year-olds. You're going to be relying on an 18-year-old true freshman point guard. And again, Fears is really, really good. So I don't want to make it seem like I'm downplaying him. But again, when your job is damn near on the line, the last thing you want to be doing is relying on a young point guard that has zero experience. And they got a couple other pieces here and there too, but I got to put Oklahoma down there. And then I'm going to round out with Mississippi State. And I do think the Bulldogs can be good. I mentioned I just talked about Kanye Clary, right? Josh Hubbard should be in for a major leap. You know, they brought in a couple guys back. They got a couple guys for that transfer portal. We're going to see about Riley Kugel. Riley Kugel is a guy that can determine the fate of this team because we talked about it. He had his moments where he looked amazing. But also, too, Florida took off their season last year when they put him on the bench. And that's just the truth of the matter. And it's unfortunate because this dude is really good. I mean, when he put his name to the transfer portal, he had a top 4 that was like consisted of like Houston, Kansas, and like just all top tier schools. UConn was in there, I think. So ends up at Mississippi State, and we'll see how it works out for them. But I'm gonna throw them down there, and then I'm gonna finish off with Georgia. I'm gonna finish off that last bottom tier with the Bulldogs. Another coach that I believe in, Mike White, I do think is gonna get Georgia rolling. I love Silas Demery. I think he's one of the more underrated guards in this conference. You know, Blue Kane, they were both really good as freshmen. You mentioned Asa Noel, you know, coming in from Montverde, a 6'11" power forward that can stretch the floor a little bit, big-time rebounder amongst other things. I just don't see Georgia having that much success this year, but I do think Mike White is taking the right steps to get the Bulldogs closer and back to the NCAA tournament. And that's where I'll finish out the bottom tier. Or excuse me, did I mention Mizzou? I think I put Mizzou in there.
No, you didn't have Mizzou, yeah.
So Mizzou is the last one. And another one that I hate to do just because I am a big fan of Dennis Gates. The fact of the matter is, though, majority of his best players or majority of his players that he's going to need to be good this year are all young and inexperienced. And I think they brought in one of the better freshman classes. You got, you know, Anor Boateng, you mentioned. You got Peyton Marshall. You got T.O. Barrett. You got a couple other guys I like, Marcus Allen out of Florida. They have players. Anthony Robinson is going to be a sophomore. I think Anthony Robinson, I'm going to tell you right now, remember his name. He's a sophomore. He's going to be one of the better players in this conference. I know we're not going to talk about Mizzou probably a lot this year, but Anthony Robinson is going to be a dude that's going to take off this year. No doubt about it in my mind. He is a problem, and I definitely think he's going to be in the NBA too. But for them, again, I just think they're going to be relying too much on freshmen. I think next year when we do this same preview, I'm definitely going to have them as like a top 6 or 7 team in the conference. No doubt about it in my mind. So that's where I'll finish off with that bottom tier.
Yeah.
The middle tier,
they added Mark Mitchell too, so they should. Yeah. You can't be worse than 0-18 in the conference. I mean, you just naturally have to get better.
They got Mark Mitchell and they got Tony Perkins from Iowa too, so they got a little bit of experience. But again, I just think the core of that team is going to be based around those incoming freshmen, and I think the core is good. Again, I don't want to mistake that whatsoever. It's just about, again, you're in the SEC, it's a loaded conference. You got to get that experience, and the only way to get through it is to go through it. So,
and they play Memphis to start off the season, so we'll see that. We'll see that from the jump.
That's going to be a good challenge. So that's why I wrap up the bottom tier. The middle tier, this is where I'm gonna probably get, you know, some messages about this one. So I'm interested to see how this goes. But it's honestly weird because I think the middle tier is much more closer to the top tier than the bottom tier. But for the middle tier, I'm gonna start off with Texas. And the Longhorns, man, fascinate me because you mentioned, you know, Trey Johnson. They got Tremont Mark. They still got Caden Shedrick, right? They have talent. The talent is not the issue whatsoever with this team. it's all about, can Rodney Terry get these guys to mesh and gel, because they also brought in a lot of transfers, right? Tyrese Hunter, my guy, he transferred out. He goes to Memphis. But you bring in Jordan Pope from Oregon State. You bring back, Chendo Weaver, who I think is good. And you bring in Arthur Kaluma, our boy Arthur Kaluma. At the last second, they brought in Arthur Kaluma.
He
Right?
was in the portal for a minute too. I was like, hold up, why isn't nobody picked up Kaluma? But
Exactly. He went from Creighton to K-State to Texas. And this was a dude that we thought was going to be in the NBA. Had he stayed at Creighton, he might be in the NBA right now for all we know. You know what I'm saying? He's a guy that's where it's kind of like the dark side of the transfer portal, right? You left a school that maximized your game. You went to another place, didn't work out, and now you're at your third stop in 3 years. So to me, it's unfortunate, but I hope he puts it all together this year and gets it right. And then again, they just have players. Devon Pryor is another one. He's a sophomore. He didn't play a lot last year, but I've been hearing a lot of things out of Austin about him. He's a 6'7" forward. But Texas as a whole, I just think the talent is there. It's just about how does it mesh. Tremont Mark and Trey Johnson, those are guys that are gonna need the rock in their hands. And I'm very curious to see how they coexist in the SEC. So we'll start off with Texas in that mid-tier. And then I'll throw A&M. Let's go A&M right there next. I actually like this A&M team. I'm not going to lie, because we already know Wade Taylor IV is one of the most dynamic guards in the country, right? But they also added Zurich Phelps, from SMU, who's another big-time transfer. He'll be a senior. I love his game a lot. I think he's going to not just balance out having Wade Taylor, but I think he's going to take a lot of offensive pressure off of Wade Taylor, because when people talk about Wade Taylor, it's kind of like the Caleb Love thing, where it feels like he's just a shot chucker and an inefficient shot chucker at that. But the issue is that they haven't necessarily had the teammates to help take that pressure off of him. And so they have to shoot those shots because nobody else really can. When you looked at Arizona last year, Kylan Boswell didn't take too much pressure off of Caleb Love. When you looked at A&M last year, who's going to take the shots away from Wade Taylor? Nobody. So I think getting a guy like Phelps amplifies that a lot. And so to me, I think you have that. You bring back Anderson Garcia, you still got your boy Henry Coleman. This A&M team probably should end up being the best A&M team that Buzz Williams has had since he's been down there at College Station, in my opinion. So I'm looking forward to see what the Aggies can do. This is a big year. I expect them to be in the tournament, and I expect them to win a lot of games. So we'll start off with them.
And with Wade Taylor, the inefficiencies was a big thing early on, but it definitely got corrected towards the end of the season because he had a lot more efficient games towards the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, you go back and watch the NCAA tournament game, they beat Nebraska, and then they lost to Houston. But that Houston game went to overtime. They were right there, being a really good Houston team that was arguably the best team in the Big 12 last year. So to me, I love this A&M team, man. We'll talk about them as the season goes on, but the biggest issue with them is that their non-conference scheduling has been horrendous. And Buzz Williams has kind of talked about that a lot, but I think I haven't seen it this year, but we'll see. But I like this Aggie team a lot. I honestly think that's one of the better teams in the SEC. I'm going to just put them in my mid-tier now, but they could easily crack into that top tier. But we'll keep going.
It's definitely better. I'll whip off some names. You got UCF to start off the season, but they go play the Buckeyes, Oregon, Creighton, Texas Tech, Purdue, Wake Forest.
Okay, they got games.
So they got some competition early on.
Yeah, I like that schedule a lot, actually. So good for Buzz. He's starting to finally figure it out and put it together and give his team some competition going into the SEC. But keeping going at mid-tier, I'll go Florida, the Gators. I'm only curious because this is another team that could finish in that top tier. I just want to see how big the loss of Zion Pullen is, because Walter Clayton was super dynamic, but he was super dynamic as a scoring guard. Zion Pullen, he did the great service of just being that point guard and making sure everybody else got their shots. So who steps into that role? Again, they got some players, though. I don't want to sleep on them whatsoever. Alex Condor was pretty good last year. Again, you bring back Walter Clayton. You got players. Ruben Chenyelu, I just mentioned. So I think Florida could have another successful season under Todd Golden, in my opinion. And then I'll put Ole Miss in there. Again, we already kind of touched on them, but, you got Jamin Brakefield back for what seems like 100 years now. You got Matthew Morrell back, same thing. We thought for years he would be in the NBA by now, but he's still there. You got
I still think he's he's a top. He's getting drafted next year. I just love his game, man, and that's why I like this Ole Miss team with him and Padula. That's gonna give backcourts hell this season.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's another team. The talent is there, right? You bring back, Jalen Murray. I like Robert Cowherd last year as a freshman. Dre Davis, another good transfer, originally from Naptown, was at Seton Hall last year playing for Shaheen Holloway. He's another player that I loved a lot. He's just a guy that does everything, rebounds, can push the ball in transition. You can play your offense through him through the post, and just an active and very good player too. So I'm gonna put Ole Miss there, and then continuing on. Let's go. I think that might be it. I said Texas. I think that is it actually. Or yeah, that's it. That's it for that mid tier. And so the top tier, this is in no order, but it's just what it is. It's just the big dogs of the conference. We're gonna go Alabama. We already know a lot of people have them as the number one overall team in the country. You got Mark Sears, coming off the Final Four run. He was one of the most dynamic players in the country last year. You bring back Grant Nelson. You bring back Latrell Wrightsell. You bring back Jaron Stevenson. They're just stacked on top of the freshman class that we mentioned with Nazir Cunningham, Darion Reed, Aiden Sherrill, LeBaron Philon. The talent is just evident. You got Houston Millette. You got Chris Youngblood from USF. Like, they just have talent at all spots. So Alabama is a clear gimme. Then I'm going to go Tennessee. And Tennessee is an interesting one because I really, really, really wanted to put them in that second tier. But I'm not going to, just because I respect Rick Barnes. And even though I'm not the biggest fan of Rick Barnes, if Rick Barnes is going to do anything, he's going to win games in the SEC. I think more than anybody, he knows how to win in the SEC. I think the only coach that knows how to win more in the SEC than him is probably Coach Cal, right? But to me, yes, Dalton Connect is gone. Santiago Vescovi is gone. My biggest concern, on top of what I just mentioned, is that not only did you lose Jonas Adu, but you lost Tobe Awaka too. You lost your front court. So you're going to be relying on JP Estrella. You're going to be relying on Igor Milicic, right? So I want to see how that works out. Kay Phillips is another guy, but they do have talent. My concern is not just the front court, but who can replenish that Dalton Connect scoring. And as great of a scorer Dalton Connect was, you're not going to be able to replace that with just one guy. It's going to have to be multiple guys. Exactly. You know what I'm saying? But Shaz Lanier, getting high praise. He's from Nashville, 6'5" guard out of North Florida. Zakai Ziegler's back for his final season. You have some good players. Jordan Gainey was very solid for them last year. Jemai Meshack, shout out to him, Southern California product. You got in Felix Akpar from Ohio State. He's going to have to hold down the front court. He's my concern just because he never really put together at Ohio State, but maybe with some more structure at Tennessee, he'll get right. But I'm not too worried. Cameron Carr is a name I'll say too. Sophomore, did not play last year, 6'6", big-time shooter, good wingspan. I think he's going to fit into that system really well too. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the Vols can do. Again, I want to put him in that mid-tier, but just because I trust and respect Rick Barnes in the SEC, I'm going to put him in that top tier. But continuing on, let's go with Kentucky. I mean, Mark Pope, we already talked about. They got a whole bunch of players. I'm not going to continue to beat the drum, but you got Lamont Butler. You got a whole bunch of players. Kobe Brea, Jackson Robinson, Colin Chandler, Amari Williams. They got players. Andrew Carr. So, Kentucky, they just have experience. I think with that offense, Mark Pope is going to make life easier for all those guys. And I think the defense is going to come around to be good this year too and be solid enough, to win, the Wildcats a lot of games. And look, they play a tough and loaded schedule. They play your Blue Devils at the Champions Classic down there in Atlanta, I believe it is this year. And amongst other guys, I think they're still in that CBS Classic. I don't know if they play Ohio State or Carolina or UCLA. We'll see how that goes. But
yeah, they got Ohio State.
They got Ohio State. So that's going to be a game too. Ohio State got a very good roster too. So I'm looking forward to that. But, I'll put the Wildcats up there. Arkansas, we already talked about it. Don't want to continue to beat the drum on that one. And then Auburn, the Tigers. The Auburn Tigers, man, I'm not going to lie to y'all, might be able to just win this conference. I think they're that good. And I already touched upon, you have Tahad Pettiford, who could be one of the best freshmen in this conference. I think he personally will be the best freshman in this conference. I would not be surprised what it is. JP Pegas is getting a lot of love, transferring
Yeah,
over from Furman. You know, the whole thing with them is they're just dying for point guard play again, right? Because last year
desperately. Yeah, it was
it
not
just
good.
wasn't it.
It
With
wasn't
Wendell
it at
Moore
all. Yeah,
and Aiden Holloway, Denver Jones couldn't really put together. Sorry, Wendell Moore was there, or yeah, Wendell Green, excuse me. He was there a few years ago. But Denver Jones, he's gonna have a year under his belt. You got Janai Broom, you got Chris Moore, you have a whole bunch of guys. You bring back Chad Baker Mazzara. Their front court is one of the best in the country. Miles Kelly is another underrated guard out of Georgia Tech, who I thought was really, really good, right? He's had some very good moments throughout the course of his career. And as a whole, you bring back Dylan Cardwell again. So they got experience. They got depth in that front court. I think they got the guard play to match. The
it's a big,
Tigers are going to be a legit problem this year, man. I'm looking forward to see what Bruce Pearl can do with that squad.
very balanced squad.
Yeah, so I think they're going to be a major threat in this conference. And I want to say, I think that should be all the squads, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think. All right. So in your bottom tier, in Kev's bottom tier, we got Vandy, we got the Gamecocks of South Carolina, we got the Tigers of LSU, Boomer Sooner, Mississippi State, Georgia, Mizzou Tigers. In our mid tier, we got the Longhorns of Texas, the Aggies of Texas A&M, the Gators, and Ole Miss. And in your top tier, we got Roll Tide, we got Tennessee, we got Big Blue Nation, Kentucky, we got the Razorbacks of Arkansas, and the Tigers of Auburn.
Yes, sir.
To round off Kev's 3 tiers of the SEC. So, Kev, who wins the SEC? And who's the player of the year in the SEC?
Man, I'm going to say Auburn wins it. And I'm going to go player of the year is Wade Taylor. I think Wade Taylor has a season that stamps him as one of the best guards to walk through that Texas A&M program. And I think he's going to win them a lot of games. And again, I just think the fact that they're going to be more balanced offensively is going to take that pressure off him, and it's going to force him to be more efficient and take smarter shots and take the right shots at the right times and not have to settle for a lot of those bailout shots at the end of the shot clock. So to me, yeah, man, I'm going to go with Auburn to win it. I know that's not the favorite. I know a lot of people are going Alabama, some are going Arkansas, some are going Tennessee. I'm going to go Auburn, and I'm going to take Wade Taylor the 4 to win SEC Player of the Year.
The most overrated team in the SEC, the most underrated team in the SEC.
Most overrated, I'm going to go with the Vols. And I know some people are going to, come back on me on that one just because, again, Rick Barnes knows how to win the SEC. I'm not ever denying that. I just think so much roster turnover. They do have some guys that were on the team last year, but because of that roster turnover in the front court, I'm just concerned with how they put it all together. And then underrated, I'm gonna say, I was about to say Ole Miss. I'm gonna go Florida. And I think they're kind of like, I believe people have them as a tournament team. I think they're probably like top 6, top 7, like consensus for most people. But I do think they could squeeze in there and potentially crack that top 5 and make some noise down there in Gainesville.
I'm gonna go my overrated team. I think Arkansas. I'm gonna go Arkansas. I'm skeptical about if everything's going to work. I think there's a lot of mouths to feed, and I think they're going to be some unhappy guards on that team. So I think they're a tourney team, but I don't know if they're going to be as good as some people project them. And an underrated team, either Ole Miss or Mississippi State. I like Ole Miss. I'll go Mississippi State. I think they're going to be better than people think. I think Riley Kugel, I think he finally puts it together. He's been a guy that's been not just someone that we've talked about, as being a great college player, but like in the NBA, like he's been on the radar for that. I think he'll put it together and get it going there. So that's going to be my underrated team and overrated team. Which coach is feeling it, man? This coach is under the most pressure because there's some people that like I said, I talked about before that some people that some podcasts I listen to that they said there might not be coaches that are feeling it, but I don't feel that way. So Kev, who you think's who's feeling it right now? Who's under the most pressure in the SEC, coaching wise?
It's got to be Porter Moser, man. It has to be Porter Moser. Again, you're going into year 4. You're at Oklahoma, which has a really good history, by the way. I mean, Trae Young was just there. You've had a few other guys, but you have no NCAA tournament appearances since you've been there, and you're heading into a new conference. And again, you're going to be relying on a reclass point guard that has not played a single minute officially of college basketball yet. That's a
Mhm.
lot. And I know Porter Moser is not sleeping well at night because I don't think he's comfortable down there at all. But again, you look at last season, this time last year, a lot of people had high expectations for Oklahoma with Javion McCullum, with John Hughley, with Milos Uzan, with Otega Owe, who transferred to Kentucky, right? So you lost a ton of talent, and now you're trying to replenish that, and you don't really have any crazy momentum. I seen they just got a recruit the other day, but all in all, I mean, when you look at these jobs, for the most part, most of these guys are secure because they're either brand new or they've had some type of winning, right? Some have had both. But for Porter Moser, I mean, your first year you went 19-16. Last year you were 15-17, and this past year in the Big 12 you were 20-12, which isn't bad, which is definitely signs of improvement. But now you got to adjust to going to a new conference, which is just as loaded as the Big 12, in my opinion. You can make a case which one is better. So I'm like, man, your team's not as good as they were a year ago. So it's got to be Porter Moser, man. He's got to make something out of nothing. And if he doesn't win this year, it's not going to be easy going into next year. You're going to have to really put together the right pieces going into next season because right now it's not looking too hot down there in Norman, Oklahoma.
Yeah, he's definitely feeling it. No tournament, right? No tournament appearances, right?
None.
None. And now you're going into the SEC, more expectations. It's crazy. You go from the Big 12. In football, they talked about like, oh man, you're gonna go from the easy conference going into the SEC. In college basketball, it's like, man, you can flip a coin on on the toughness, and we'll get into our Big 12 preview very soon. We'll talk
Yep.
about that because we know how a dogfight that's going to be between those teams in that conference. But yeah, Porter Mose is definitely feeling it. And like I said, there's a couple coaches that definitely, but he's definitely feeling it the most. And it's going to be, he's in our bottom tier. He's in your bottom tier, so it might be tough times in Norman, Oklahoma, for the Sooners as they head into their first season in the SEC. But I think that covers it all with our third installment of our conference previews. Kev, another Get It Bucket podcast in the books, brother. Anything you want to add before we sign off?
I'm gonna just say, watch out for them Aggies, man, because I'm actually looking at this roster. Buzz Williams did a good job of identifying talent and bringing in. I mentioned Zurich Phelps from SMU, but they brought in Pharrell Payne, another big man from Minnesota last year that was really good. They got CJ Wilcher, who was a sniper at Nebraska last year. He's up from your ends from Jersey. So I think Buzz Williams did a great job of identifying talent and adding in some offensive guys. You got Manny Obaseki, you got Solomon Washington back. So watch out for the Aggies, man. I think Texas A&M is primed to make a lot of noise this year in the SEC. But as always, I appreciate y'all. Y'all stay tuned. Shout out to Off the Ball Network. We're going to keep pumping these out. Season's right around the corner. It's the best time of the year.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And make sure to check out the Big Ten preview, ACC preview. The ACC preview is definitely gotten some good feedback. So appreciate everyone who's tuned in. Numbers keep going up for that. Make sure to follow. Make sure to sub to the Off the Ball Network YouTube channel. The channel has been growing a lot these last few weeks. So really, like I said, really appreciate everyone who's put out content for the network. And like I said, basketball season is this season. You know how I am. I'm all in on basketball, covering the NBA, doing college basketball stuff with Kev, covering recruiting and all that. So we're gonna kill it this basketball season. We got a bunch of great hoop heads at the network. So make sure to follow all of them. I got the tweet pinned on the OTB_network. You can follow that account on X. So make sure to follow all those great hoop heads and all that. But we're going to preview the couple more conferences as we get closer and closer. Make sure to follow me, Off the Ball Podcast. Where can they find you? And then we'll let them know what conference we'll be previewing next.
Yes, sir. It's at Kev Luke the Great. That's KevLukethaGreat on both Twitter and Instagram. You follow me, I'll follow y'all back, man. I'm not antisocial, so I appreciate y'all, but we're gonna keep them rocking. We'll probably do the Big 12 next. I think the Big 12 has been waiting on us, so I'm looking forward to that one.
Yep, we'll get to the Big 12, cover the Big East, and everything else in the world of college basketball. The AP poll came out, as you can see on the bottom scroll. You can see who's in the top 25. Let us know, in the comment section how we feel about, the AP poll. I know people get so worked up about preseason polls, and it's just preseason polls, man. I get. Sometimes I don't get why they do it, but then I get why they do it because it gets people talking. But we'll probably dive into a little bit more in the next show. But college basketball season is creeping up, Kev. So people ready to go for this college basketball season. Probably on the YouTube channel. Make sure to listen on Spotify, Apple. Give us a 5-star rating. Appreciate everyone who has supported the Get a Bucket podcast. But on that note, be well, be safe, take care, get a bucket. We out.
Peace.